Good morning. My name is David Saab. I represent the Thames Valley Chamber of Commerce as Business Alliance Manager and Mental Wellbeing Champion. Welcome to this webinar where we shall be discussing the challenges and best practices in providing a responsive and effective mental wellbeing strategy. Please, all of the attendees, accept our apologies while you've witnessed us housekeeping and vacuuming the floor and getting our hair ready. We appreciate your patience. I'm sure you'll appreciate that during COVID, this new technology somewhat catches us off guard. So I'm grateful to see you all with us, so many of us. To introduce our business manifesto for 2020 for the Thames Valley Chamber of Commerce, sets out the opportunities and challenges our membership want to champion and which we believe will have the most impact. One of our 5 main priorities is to strengthen awareness of and the commitment to delivering mental health fitness, diversity and belonging in the workplace, and to provide opportunities for the sharing and adoption of best practice. Today's webinar seeks to pull together mental wellbeing advocates from within the region and establish a mental wellbeing community where we can learn from each other, discuss common challenges and share best practices as we seek to establish responsive and effective mental wellbeing strategies within our organisations. Today's panel is made up of some of the most passionate and dedicated mental wellbeing advocates I have had the privilege of meeting, and I look forward to the insights that they will share with us. Before meeting our panelists, may I first introduce our chair, Stuart Carroll from Sanofi. Stuart is a senior health economist and market access expert, specialising in pharmaceuticals, health technology appraisal, HTA, health policy and public affairs. He is currently the head of market access for Sanofi Pasteur in the UK and Ireland, where he is also a member of the health and wellbeing team and a trained mental health first aider. His experience spans an impressive number of areas, including NHS policy, public affairs, local government, political media and communications, epidemiology, and mental health. Stuart is a fellow of the Royal Society of Public Health, Royal Society for Tropical Medicine and Hygiene, and Royal Society of Arts. He is a former member of the New Drugs Committee for the Scottish Medicines Consortium, a member of the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence Appeals panel, and also an elected local councillor in the Royal Borough of Windsor and Maidenhead, where he serves as the Deputy Chair of Cabinet and lead member for Adult Social Care, Health, Mental Health and Children's Services. It is my pleasure to hand proceedings over to you, Stuart.
Thank you very much, David, and welcome everyone to this panel, and thank you for making the time to join us today. First and foremost, I just want to introduce our panel. We have some excellent people here with some fantastic insights we're going to present in a few moments. Anna Blackman, who's a partner in risk assurance at PwC, Claire Lyons-Collins, who's the project director at Mental Health Innovation and Improvement for the National Health Service, Carl, who's a Chief Health, Safety and Security Officer at Thames Water, Yvonne McCann, Health, Safety and Wellbeing Head at Bayer, and Gordon Tillett, who's Head of HR at Sanofi. Just before I pass to our guest speakers today, I think it's just important to frame why what we're going to discuss today is important. There are many aspects to workplace health, and of course in the most direct sense and arguably visible sense, that's health and safety. So making sure that offices, buildings are free from hazards and are safe places for people to work. But of course, just as important as that, there's also mental health, emotional health, which, as we know, is fundamental to every single one of us. Ultimately, we are all molecules of emotion. We all have motivations. We all have mental health. We all have emotional health. And to that extent, the environment, the culture within a workplace is seminal to how employee mental health and emotional health and general workplace health is going to be maximized. And as we all know, we spend so much time at work that these aspects are really important considerations. Of course, as you'll see here, I've got the famous Maslow Pyramid, and in some ways he was before his time, because as you can see on that pyramid, he talks about things like trust, belonging, recognition, esteem, very, very important aspects as to how an employee will be motivated, how they will feel. And of course, that directly touches upon things such as mental health, emotional health, and employees' environment. Of course, for the HR gurus amongst us, a chap called Herzberg talks about hygiene factors. When we talk about hygiene factors in the modern sense, again, we're very much touching upon occupational health, well-being, healthy life choices, how people are managed, how organisations approach these imperatives. And I've just included at the bottom here this fantastic quote from Teal Scott with that wonderful image of Einstein. I won't read the full quote out, but effectively it talks about perspective, about how we view things from our mind's eye and how people are interpreted or perceived as a consequence. And of course, it was Einstein himself who defined insanity as doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And so I'm pleased to say today what we're going to talk about, what our panelists are going to talk about, some examples of innovation, some examples of doing things differently to really optimize and maximize workplace health, but particularly the focus of what we're going to be touched upon today, mental health and emotional health. And why is this important from a business point of view? Of course, we've just touched upon the human dimension, which is of course always the starting point. But when you look at some of the statistics, some of the evidence base around this, it's absolutely staggering. 89% of people will at some point show a form of presenteeism. 86% of people have an inability to fully switch off. 60% of absences or issues to do with people taking time off work relating to mental health. And estimates show, mental health is costing employers up to £45 billion a year. That is a huge, huge sum of money. And of course, this is why investment, actually making improvements, is so very important. For every pound spent in initiatives that can deal with these issues, employers can get £5 back. So when we look at the economic case, and as someone who is a health economist by background, this isn't just about doing the right thing for employees, it's also a sound business case, and it's a sound thing to do as an organisation. Now, just before I pass to our first guest speaker, I haven't lost the plot here with this slide. You might be thinking, why on earth has he got a slide with REM and Michael Stipe there in the corner? Well, the reason I put this slide here is of course, we're in very unusual times because of the pandemic. I think it is fair to say, as REM once sang out, it is the end of the world as we know it. And what we're going to see with some of the presentations is particular examples of what organisations have been doing during this pandemic, during lockdown, where we've all had to embrace home working, a virtual medium, just like we're doing now. And of course, REM sang out, and I feel fine. But I think the question is, do we feel fine? How are we tackling this problem? How are we dealing with the world as it is today? And how are we going to deal with the world as it will be tomorrow? And I think there's certainly some very important considerations when we think about workplace health and well-being. So I'm going to now introduce Gordon Tillett, who's our head of HR at Sanofi, to talk about some of the initiatives, some of the things we've been doing at Sanofi. So over to you, Gordon.
Thanks very much, Stuart, and thanks everyone for joining this webinar today. Yes, I'm head of HR at Sanofi. I'm based in our Reading office, which is in Thames Valley Park, so just outside the centre of Reading. Mental health is incredibly important, but for us it fits into the kind of wider well-being of employees, and we put that into kind of 4 buckets, 4 pillars. And I'll come back to the one really focused on mental health, feel good last. And that's actually the one I think we've probably got most opportunity in, which is why it's so important to be talking with others, learning from others, and I'm sure there's other people who have got kind of better practices to share. But the other pillars, kind of one is about eat well. It's important that people kind of have a good balanced diet. We're very lucky to have a good restaurant on site where we encourage healthy choices. And we've got some employees who have special skills in nutrition, and they've led seminars and webinars about good nutrition. The second one is about moving often. We moved to a kind of a hot desking environment, so you don't have the same desk. We encourage people to move to different spaces. We encourage people to join exercise classes, which we do on site, and also some sports outside. We've recently launched this app, this Decadoo app, which essentially can track your steps, and we've had some really kind of healthy competition, particularly in lockdown, with people walking, cycling, and taking exercise. And taking breaks in this time is, of course, very important. The third area, stay healthy. We're lucky to have a good medical scheme, which employees have. We also support flu vaccinations. You know, flu vaccinations are very important, not just in keeping employees healthy, but actually for the kind of wider community. The more people who are vaccinated, the better. And to make it easy, we found bringing it on site helps, and actually doing it with a kind of just turn up. We got almost kind of twice the uptake last year by having a turn up and get your vaccination rather than having to kind of book a slot. So again, the easier you make things like this is good. And then the kind of feel good. The feel good is really where mental health comes. And this, I think, is an area we can all do a lot more. Certainly we can. One of the things we've done is to train mental health first aiders. And we've got about 25 employees who have been through a program educating about mental health, giving them skills to support others. And a mental health first aider is like a first aider, which we're more familiar with. You know, if someone's got an injury, an illness, the first point of call is your first aider, and then you bring in the specialist. And really that's the idea of mental health first aiders. If people have got a challenge or a need or want to talk, there are people across our company who are trained and can be that kind of first line of support to talk to them, to help in a way that others who haven't got that experience would not perhaps say the right thing or know how to handle it. And of course, you know, if people need more specialist help, then we would direct them to that specialist help. So in fact, Stuart, our chairman, is one of those mental health first aiders, and he and others in this lockdown period have been leading groups to kind of drop in a kind of talk show remotely, and a good number of people, in fact a growing number, have been connecting to that and talking. One of the good things about you know, COVID has been challenging for us all. One of the good things, it's actually been much more connected for our field-based people. We have 300 people out in the field, out there doing their job, but without perhaps the support that those of us who work in offices have. And it's been kind of great, I think, using technology and realizing that those people can be connected and participate in our programs as much as those in an office environment. So look, I think that's just one example, that there's lots more to do, but let me hand over to the next panelists to hear their examples.
Thank you very much, Gordon. And I would also just like to say a big thank you for your leadership in this area within Sanofi. It's been fantastic to see a lot of these initiatives being driven forward. So I will pass over to our next guest speaker from PwC. So Anna, can you now take us through your slide, please?
Yeah, of course. Well, thanks everyone for joining us. I'll try to only talk for 5 minutes, but it's a subject I'm incredibly passionate about. So I will, if you might have to stop me, Stuart, if you're not careful. So the slide you've got in front of you is our current wellbeing approach, but I thought I'd back up a bit to talk a little bit about the journey we've been on as an organisation in relation to mental health. So our focus on mental health in particular started about 4 years ago, and it was driven by one particular individual in one of our central functions who had a real passion for mental health, and she was a coach. And she was seeing a lot of people come to her with a number of different challenges. So she developed a mental health strategy, which we rolled out across the firm. And in the early days, that was very much about destigmatizing mental health and getting people more comfortable talking about it and asking for help. And one of the first things we did was launch what we call Green Light to Talk, which started as green ribbons that people wear on Mental Health Awareness Week and World Mental Health Day, which is actually now spread far beyond PwC. But when we launched Green Light to Talk 4 years ago, alongside that programme, we launched what we call mental health advocates, who are the most senior people in our organisation, so all partners. And there were 6 of us 4 years ago, and I was one of them. But those 6 people were vocal about their own mental health and their own experiences about mental health, and were there to encourage people to ask for help if they needed it. We were really conscious that sometimes it's quite hard to ask for help from your immediate team, and we're a very matrixed organisation, so it's not always clear where people can go, although we've worked quite hard on that since. But we launched the Mental Health Advocate Programme with 6 partners who talked about their own mental health very publicly, and gave their contact details to everybody so that people could pick up the phone and talk to them or see them if they needed to. We've now got 25 mental health advocates across the firm. And why I guess I start with that is because I think the very senior leadership and of people talking about their mental health and giving people permission in the organisation has been instrumental to where we've got to. So we now have Green Light to Talk now happens every month, and someone in the firm somewhere talks about a mental health challenge they might have, and we've got the most junior people in the organisation being willing to talk about their experiences. That has made a massive difference culturally in the organisation, so that people feel more empowered to talk about it, ask their colleagues how they are, and genuinely listen to the answer. And we're at the point where, you know, it's easier for people to ask for help without worrying about the impact that might have on their career. So we've been on that journey for sort of 4 years, and the slide you've got in front of you has been our strategy that I suppose we've been working on for the past couple of years. So we're still doing the work around destigmatising mental health, and we're talking about it regularly, particularly so that people don't feel like it's an initiative. But now we are putting more structure in place to look at wellbeing in the round, recognising that you can't disentangle physical health from mental health. So I won't touch on all of the pieces of the slide, but in connection, that's where we've got the leadership part, which I think is really important. In terms of support, we have an employee assistance programme, which is really important. People can have face-to-face counselling through that. But what we've also done is given all of our people access to talking therapies through AXA, and they can get access to that without having to see their GP. So they're triaged by AXA, and then they can get access very quickly to talking therapies if they need them, or things more significant than that. That's been a big help in getting people to access to the right sort of support quickly. And then in terms of environment, we've got about 20 offices across the country. We've made it possible for people to bring their bike to work and have a shower when they get there, or go running at lunchtime and have a shower then. So our offices are set up to allow people to focus on their physical well-being during the day or on their way to work. We also have a programme called Everyday Flexibility, which is encouraging people to think about their working day and think about where they need to be and how they want to work, in an attempt to combat, I guess, the presenteeism, Stuart, you mentioned. So people are less focused on where they are and more focused on what they're doing. So that's given people permission across the organisation to build things into their daily routine that will help their well-being, whether that's coming in a bit later to miss the commute, or whether that's working at home, or whether that's, you know, taking time out during the day to do some exercise. It's very much about helping people feel like they can work out what works for them, and then they can do it. And it's absolutely come into its own during COVID, because everyone has been flexing how they've been working depending on how COVID's affected them. So I suppose those were the things I wanted to touch on. Don't think there was anything else particularly. But it's been, for us, it's been very much a journey from really focusing on destigmatising, getting really senior folk to be very open about their own experiences, through to trying to get better access for people when they do have a problem, through to now sort of very much focused on getting people to feel well. And then, so actually, I suppose our strategy now is to try to get people more well, so they have less, so we have less occurrence of mental health. So that's our strategy at the moment.
Thank you very much, Anna. I'm just going to take an initial question we've had from Lucy Hayward. She's just asking, how do you train people on some of the things you've just described? Is it in training?
So our mental health advocates are qualified mental health first aiders, so they do the 2-day training course. They also go through a training program with the Samaritans. We've had a partnership with the Samaritans for a number of years, and they've come in and given training to the mental health advocates, so that they are better equipped to deal with some of the challenges people might bring to them. Those mental health advocates also have what we call clinical supervision. So recognising that people bring you often quite complex problems can be quite difficult for you to process as well. And what we don't want is our mental health advocates feeling overloaded by everyone coming to them and talking about their particular challenges. So once a quarter, our advocates have clinical supervision with a psychiatrist and a psychologist, so we can talk to each other on a confidential, absolute no names confidential basis about some of the things we might be finding difficult about that role. So that's what we do to support those individuals.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Anna. That was really helpful. I will now move on to our next guest speaker. I'm just going to move the slide on here. So over to yourself, Carl.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Okay, so what I've tried to do is wrap up the case study for 5 minutes on 5 years journey in Thames Water that we've been on. So there's a lot in this, and I can't go through it all, unfortunately, but if I can highlight how our strategy was built and share some of the outcomes that we've seen. And the reason for putting it all, not all of it, this is kind of an idea of the main things that we went through, the initiatives that we put in place over each year on year. I have 2 slides. I'm very lucky David allowed me 2 slides to kind of capture everything, but this will give you a flavour. The first thing you should note is no one single initiative will get the outcomes you want. You have to be relentless over consecutive years. And that's really important. And that formed the foundation of our long-term strategy. The water industry works in 5-year cycles. So we were able to set up, that's because the price strategy is built around 5 years. So we were able to set up really what we wanted to do in that 5-year period. Our strategy was called Time to Talk. And the first thing it does is talk about the leadership in health and safety. So this is about setting the tone from the very top and making sure we have KPIs that are discussed around health as they are discussed around safety. Yeah, so physical and psychological health management is discussed at board and executive level. And then you have your health and safety committees, your deep dives, etc., your auditing, that all comes and is shared at that main exec level. The next is how you embrace and engage your supply chain. So we have a suite of essential standards. These are contractual obligations across our supply chain. Essential standard 22 is mental health and well-being, and managing health and well-being at work. And you can see that that's on our external website. If you type in Health and Safety Hub into Google, it will come up as an external website that you can have a look at. All our documentation is shared on there. The next is we set out, and you can see there back in 2013, we developed what's called a maturity model. So this allows any organization working for or on our behalf to show we have a suite of HPIs, health performance indicators, and then it allows a very interesting model which has a series of compliance statements within it that allows somebody to go from infancy to integrated and to show at any point in time where they are on that journey of physical and psychological health management. So down the left-hand side would be legal compliance, and over on the right-hand side would be extreme world-class best practice. Those are all available again on the external website that we share with everyone. So if you want to look at those or drop me a note on LinkedIn, I can certainly share that with you. Maturity models are really good if done well. The next around competency upskilling. You've got to look at your competency upskilling across the organization. We saw there, Anna spoke there about mental health first aiders. Most organizations now have implemented mental health first aiders. We have 1 in 10 within Thames. But really, it's about the education across the company. So we have a half-day MindFit awareness course that complements that to make sure everybody has a level of education around health and well-being. We also wrap virtual reality into the health courses. So what that is when you walk into any of our health courses, you're issued with your picture, but also your the headset, the earphones, and basically you get immersed into a virtual world where we trigger the stresses and strains. What does it feel like to be effects of negative mental stresses, which you can't really experience from just looking at a screen on a course. All right. The next, creating a culture of learning, you've got to look at your executive reviews. So I have no doubt many organizations will have an injury that has occurred by work, and then you'll have investigation, you'll have an executive review about learning. Why wouldn't you do the same for any illness caused by work-induced? So if you have a work-related illness, you have to have, physical or psychological, you have to prevent a recurrence. There's no good in just ignoring it. Yeah, what are you doing differently so that individual coming back into the workplace doesn't suffer again the effects? You go to the next slide. We started to labour quite hard around some of the areas around engagement, right? So we do a lot in terms of stakeholder engagement across Thames Water. It works really well for us in terms of delivering and constantly pushing the boundaries of what's really achievable. One of the ways to engage is social media. And what we've seen is a real uptick around the social media. We have a Yammer platform, for example. You'll have to keep you right on time here, Stu, because otherwise I'll just keep talking. But the Yammer platform we use is very active. So I have a connected group mental health first aiders. My 600 MHFAs are all on a closed forum. They can open and share ideas and share questions that's monitored by my clinical team. And then we have a wider mental health for everybody that can ask questions across the company. But if I give you an idea of stats, 8,000 messages were posted last year, but they were read by 1.1 million people. So you can imagine, the impact of all the reads that we have across the company. Social media is very prevalent within the organization. We have a self-assessment model called Pascal, which has worked really well. We work with our partner Healthy Performance. They're a great company. We do physical. The way I put it to the executive team is we all have our Bupa medicals because we are senior managers. Does that mean we're more important than the receptionist downstairs or the plant fitter out on the site? Well, of course we're not. So why wouldn't we give it to everybody? So everybody in Thames gets access to an annual confidential personal medical assessment that tackles both physical and psychological health within it. And that's then compounded by a self-assessment in advance of it to show where those stresses and strains are. They are brilliant in terms of helping organizations. Finally, from me, making sure that we work with our external stakeholders. So we have an abundance within Thames and we support a variety of campaigns that go on constantly. And what it does is set the tone that we're an organization that is very much around sharing what we learn. So we actively promote and share everything that we do externally as much as we do internally. So my part in short is if you want to hear any more around the journey that we've been on, it's led to an 80% reduction in work-induced illness over the last 5 years. So there's some really credible outcomes as a result of all these inputs. The AMP7 there is the next 5-year cycle that we've just started. And again, I expect everything that we've done so far, all the new fresh ideas to be shared, and we introduce them internally as well as externally. Okay, back to you, Stu.
Thank you very much, Carl, and absolutely love that, by the way. I thought you were going to sort of come in with a "let's make Thames Water great again" sort of speech, but I think you're clearly doing some great stuff as it is, and I really like the bit about education across the company. I think that is really, really important. We'll probably touch upon that a bit more in the Q&A, but thank you very much, Carl. I'm just going to move on to our next guest speaker, which is Yvonne. So if I pass over to you, please. Thank you.
Stuart, good morning, everybody. Let me give you a brief overview of the programme we have at Bayer. Like many other organisations, it's a holistic programme which looks at physical health, mental health, nutrition and exercise. But today I'm going to talk a little bit more detail about the key activities within the mental health sector. So that programme's been in place for several years, but certainly in the last 3 to 4 years, we've really driven the activity with regards to mental health. And our ultimate aim is for all managers and employees to be able to be confident and comfortable in having a conversation about mental health in the same way as they would about a bad back or a broken leg, with the ultimate aim of reducing stigma across the organisation. As Carl just referred to and others, mental health first aid is a key element of our programme. We took the approach that we would bring that expertise in-house. So myself and my colleague Lucy, who's actually been asking some questions on the session, trained as mental health first aid instructors to, one, give us that breadth of knowledge, and secondly, because actually it's the most cost-effective way for us to introduce the programme within the organisation by having those skills in-house. We've got a network of nearly 100 mental health first aiders across the organisation, both in the head office in Reading, but we found it's also very important to have that level of first aid support in our field force as well, because obviously that sector of the workforce can feel a little bit more detached by not being in the head office, where in a lot of organisations a number of these activities are centred around. The other key element for us was to provide psychological wellbeing workshops for all managers. So that's a mandatory learning activity, and everybody within the organisation, from our country leadership team and all other managers, have undertaken that, and we continue that programme on a rolling basis as we see new managers join. The key elements in that, it's fairly simplistic, I'll be honest, are looking at the symptoms, signs, whether those be physical or behavioural, psychological, that they may see from employees. Also holding up a mirror to our managers in terms of their behaviour and their impact on others, and then talking them through and refreshing them on the key elements that they can use as support. So things like occupational health, employee assistance programmes, and what opportunities they have during normal interactions within the workplace, such as one-to-ones and check-ins, to check not only on things like objectives and projects, but also on well-being. Like any other organisation, we go through continual change, and in those situations we do target those parts of the business that are going through change with those informal toolbox talks, or go along into those coffee sessions and just bring mental health as a concept and a discussion into those more informal settings as well. We've introduced just this week a virtual resilience programme. So the first cohort went through yesterday. That's a 4-week programme which is run on Teams, which has its challenges, which is centred around mindfulness. And the first 2 cohorts were full within 24 hours. So that's a programme that we will extend across the organisation. As we've heard from others, senior leadership is really, really key. So senior leadership engagement, starting with the country leadership team going through the training, but also we have a coffee with our CEO series, and him and I sat down last year on video and talked about mental health. He shared with us how he balances his work-life balance, what he does in terms of exercise and switching off. And I think that's a very powerful message, and actually seeing that across the organisation on screens then drove conversations and drove people to reach out to us. We have a 400 Years Younger programme, so that's partnering with our occupational health provider to focus both on physical and mental well-being. And as I said, field force is really key for us, looking for those opportunities to engage with that group of people. So going along to national conferences, talking about mental health, talking about the elephant in the room, getting people to reflect on what they do as their one activity which allows them to really switch off. Any opportunities to have those conversations, I would really recommend. And then, as I've heard from others as well, I think it's really key to not only focus on things like your lost time accident rates, what initiatives you've got going on, but to feed back any of those trends in terms of ill health, or pockets of the organisation where we may be seeing trends, back to that leadership team. And our country leadership team invite me to go along to each session to talk about health, safety and well-being, and to reflect that so that they've got that overview of what's happening within the organisation. Okay, that's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yvonne. Just to say, if any of you can see my cat Winston moving across my screen, that is standard. He's become very famous in Sanofi circles during this lockdown. And if you keep seeing the cursor move across the screen, it's because he thinks my mouse is an actual mouse, so he's sort of chasing it around. So apologies for that. It's all part of lockdown working. Just a quick question for you, Yvonne, because we've had a few questions here actually, which picks up on your final point about leadership and how do you get buy-in from executives and senior leaders in an organisation. Perhaps you could just quickly touch on that before we go to our final guest speaker.
Yeah, I mean, I think as you talked about right at the beginning, there's quite clear business case for doing these activities. And actually, for us, it wasn't a hard sell in terms of engaging people and engaging our leadership team on the wellbeing activities. And you know, they were very much up for doing the workshop themselves, and asked me to come back and challenge them on whether that had changed their behaviours or their approach in dealing with mental health. So it is, I think, about giving, as you said right at the beginning, that distinction between actually having a clear business benefit and being the right thing for our people. And you know, we have very clear values within our organisation, and it fitted very well with those as well.
Great, thank you very much, Yvonne. So I'm going to pass to Claire now, who's our final speaker. And just to say, Claire won't be on video because of bandwidth related issues. So by turning the video off, it ensures that we can get optimal sound. But I will pass over to you now to talk a little bit about the pandemic, which I think, of course, will be interest to everyone on this call.
Morning, everybody, and thank you, Stuart, for chairing, and to David for hosting and for having me. I am calling you from County Tipperary in Ireland, and nothing about the bandwidth of Tipperary, but more about my mum's broadband package. So apologies that you can't see me. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, I find this a really interesting infographic, which was created by an intensivist, an intensive care consultant in the States, talking about the 4 waves of a pandemic. And so wave 1 is people who have been immediately affected by COVID-19 and have been admitted into hospital. Wave 2 of those people who have had their services interrupted. So we know in the NHS that people who may have a sore knee, they've not been able to go to see their physiotherapist because services have had to be stepped down, and now have additional needs in relation to that. The third wave are those people who are shielding and cocooning, and the impact on those people. And then the 4th wave, which is the red line gradually going up, is around psychic trauma. and they call it psychic trauma in the States, but around psychological trauma. So I think that's a really good infographic, and it's something that we're using within the NHS. So I'm currently working in the incident room for the NHS for the COVID-19 response, and we are currently looking at these 4 people in terms of their rehabilitation needs, mentally and physically. I'm an occupational therapist by training. So just talk a little bit. So what we're seeing through this pandemic is actually lots of people are reporting good mental health. So I'm part of a WhatsApp group from my street. I live in London. And does anyone have any flour? Does anyone have any yeast? And, you know, people shopping for people who are shielding, and people, you know, sitting down, having meals with their family every day, seeing more of their children, and more of their husbands or wives or partners. And that can be a good and not so good thing. But actually, what we have noticed is, and I'm sure people share this, is people have developed more sense of a community and connectedness. What we're noticing in terms, and there's good and not so good things around working from home. So we know that domestic violence is really high. My children are in school. As a key worker, my children are in school, and the children that are in the school are really not the children who need to be in the school. The children who need to be in the school are the looked after children and vulnerable children. So we know that there is an awful lot going on behind closed doors that is yet to surface, as it were, because for some children, school is a safe place. We think that the language around COVID has been interesting, very warlike from the government initially, and every time, and that has created quite a lot of anxiety in the whole population, and as if a virus is something that you can fight. It's something that you can mitigate against, but it's not a personal thing that you can fight. So we haven't particularly found that helpful in the NHS. We know that every time there is an additional lockdown, as it were, or an additional measure big announcement, that there has been increases in calls to helplines. And in the NHS, we've sought support from the Samaritans and other third sector organisations for supporting NHS staff. I think NHS staff there's significant impact on them as well as other people. So we know that, you know, a good death is a really important thing, and a part of a nurse's role is supporting somebody to have a good death. And we know that, you know, for some people working in intensive care, that lots of people, you know, while we were absolutely in the peak of the deaths, because they happened 29 days after the peak of infection, is that, you know, they're not able to touch somebody because they're wearing full PPE. So that has had a significant impact. Moral injury. So those who survived, moral guilt, and we've been learning from Greater Manchester Resilience Hub following the bomb blasts a couple of years ago, as well as the Grenfell work. We think that, so normally 20% of people who are in, 20% of people who have been into intensive care will experience post-traumatic stress disorder, and it's something that we think is probably going to be much bigger because of what has happened around the measures that the government has had to take and the NHS has had to take. Teams fatigue. So in the NHS we use Teams, and we talk a lot about, you know, that we've the use of technology at the moment, and it's been wonderful and so lovely to see Winston, you know, crawling across the screen, but what we're starting to see in the NHS is that people are really quite tired from Teams fatigue. So that's certainly something that we're having to review. We're also seeing amongst children an increase in referrals into mental health services for children. And my own children, my son is 7, and I'm in Ireland at the moment because my mum is unwell, and he had a video call, and my brother was wearing a mask, and he got very frightened from that. So having to really engage and explain to our children what's going on has been very important, and there are lots of resources around that. I think the trauma is going to be ongoing and long term. We know in Norway, after the island attacks, they committed to following people up 20 years after. For 20 years after the attack, and I think only 25% of those children that were in that have been able to go on into normal education and getting jobs. So it's a mixed bag, just like mental health is a mixed bag, mental illness is a mixed bag, and a spectrum. But for us, we're having to significantly review how, as we make the changes to our work life and to coin the term the new normal, how the impact on that is for people, and we're having to adjust our mental well-being and support for that as well. So that's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claire, and thank you to all guest speakers. Some really fantastic insights there. We now have about 10-15 minutes or so just for some questions and discussion. We have had a number of people typing questions in. I've managed to get a few of them in as people were presenting. But first and foremost for you, Claire, a couple of people have actually asked about the pandemic and lockdown specifically, and in relation to employees who are likely going to burn out. So touching on upon some of the things you've just described, and asking, are there any best practice guidelines or initiatives to try and identify who those employees are, and to effectively try and stop the burnout, try and be proactive, be preventative, because that is, I think, a live concern for a lot of organisations.
Of course. So what we have been doing, and I'm sure a lot of other people have been doing, a lot of organisations have been doing, is we have been doing touch point checks. Every 2 weeks we have a touch point check survey for people. We ensure that all line managers have one-to-ones with their direct reports. We're encouraging people, and it's very difficult, isn't it? Because when you're a line manager or you're reporting into somebody, looking into the whites of somebody's eyes, and you can't necessarily, and getting that feeling of how that person is. It's a bit more of a challenge for us, but those things such as touch point surveys every couple of weeks, ensuring that there are one-to-ones, because everybody will have different challenges from these. I think we are reviewing again that Teams, because we use Teams in the NHS, that Teams fatigue is really big. And actually what we've noticed as well is that, we were all kind of on alert, so we're in that heightened state during the peak, and people are getting very tired as the adrenaline goes down and stuff. We're also making special, excuse me, not specifically on burnout, but doing individual assessments on people. So certainly from people from BAME backgrounds, and we do know that there is something about this virus that disproportionately affects people from BAME backgrounds. So we have specific assessments and support for that. We also have we also have, we're getting people to do, sometimes you don't have to, but sometimes people are having dinner together and that type of thing. So when people would normally go to the pub together, so we're encouraging that kind of thing. But I think and certainly from my experience of working in the incident room, it's changing all the time. So we're having to adapt all the time. So I think it's about listening to your employees and seeing how, and there are some really good practices I would suggest, and I can put it on if I can put it on the link. There's a very good mental health trust in Newcastle. It's the most outstanding mental health trust in the country, and they've created a really good website called Northern Mental Health, as well as providing leaflets to everybody in Newcastle and Cumbria, look at how they could be impacted by this pandemic. So I will post that on the Q&A now, or the chat. Okay.
Fantastic, thank you very much. As someone who emanates from Newcastle, and hence Mr. Shearer behind me, I'm very pleased to see we're leading the way on that. And
they
that
are amazing.
Great support. Well, Much better than the football team by the sounds of it, but that's fantastic to hear. So we've also got a couple of questions that have come in. So Jay Sandu and also our very own Nick Bellinger at Sanofi have effectively asked the same question, which is, I'll put this to Gordon actually. Could you talk of some examples of how we're measuring the impact of any of the strategies that are being implemented? I know, Gordon, we've done an audit, and it might be worth you just speaking to that, if that's okay.
Yeah, measuring is hard, but there is a Public Health England audit which we looked at, and I think is very good. So we decided that was a good place to start using this, publicly available audit. And it's an internal audit, so we've done it initially to kind of do our own assessment where we're strong. We tend to be stronger on some of the more kind of physical aspects of health, and less strong on some of the mental health. But it's very broad across the spectrum. I think it gives you pointers of where you may do. In terms of measuring the success of the programs, that is much harder. We would use tools like Opinion Survey, which I get are some of those questions. We have actually put in some questions about how people are kind of feeling. We're doing a diversity pulse survey soon, and that picks up some of the kind of themes. Are you feeling able to bring yourself to work? And while that may be for a whole variety of reasons, feeling cared for, feeling kind of valued, feeling safe is one of the things which would affect. So I think pulse surveys, opinion surveys can do it, but I really would encourage people to have a look at this audit, which for us was, it's not all great, because obviously we scored ourselves honestly, and we were green in some areas, orange in others, and red in others. And arguably it gives you a kind of long list of things to work on, but I think that's a kind of great place to start.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Gordon. Specific question for Carl. This is from Lucy Hayward. She asks, during your implementation, has there been one big thing that really leveraged your campaign and got people talking about health and safety, and particularly mental health? Was there a light bulb moment that you came across when you were seeking to implement?
Hello, Lucy. Thanks for the question. The answer, in truth, is no. Regrettably, I'd love to say there was one thing that really changed Thames, but if you remember what I said at the very outset of my presentation, you need to be relentless over consecutive years, and no one single initiative will bring the outcome you need. I guess if you're asking what are the key things that you believe, if you were to say, right, what do I want to go in and say? I look each month across all our stats, all our monitoring. And I remember in the early days where we didn't have health, physical or psychological, around the board table. And I remember starting to talk to the executive in a way that made them really understand what we were trying to achieve. You see, I said to them, it's not the physical or psychological health issue that will prevent a person thriving in work. It's the environment in which they are placed. And when you start to build on statements like that, you can really start to leverage the things like it's work and non-work related issues shouldn't be differentiated. We cannot no longer say what happens in your home life is your home life, what happens in work is important to us. That's wrong. A vast majority of the initiatives that we've put in place have actually been to support people in their home working environment and their home life in general, because people aren't robots. They can't leave everything at the door. You may have financial issues, you may have mental health issues that affect you outside of work as much as they do inside. The important bit is that we create a culture of care, and one that embraces diversity, embraces challenges that people are facing, and then we empower our managers to make reasonable adjustments so that people can thrive in work. And it's worked very well for us, setting that tone and having that approach.
Thank you very much, Carl. I think what you said there is spot on. Like in one of the slides I presented, there's that statistic that 86% of people can't switch off. And I think that speaks to the point of, as you correctly say, work and life have to be treated concentrically when we're looking at workplace health, and particularly mental health. We've got a question from Tessa McEwen. I think this might be one for you, Anna, actually. I think you touched upon some of this in your presentation, but specifically, is anyone running skills training to develop employees' ability to prevent future mental ill health as a proactive protection?
Yeah, so a lot of our work is very much focused on that, because we reckon what we've done over the past 4 years is we've put systems and processes in place that actually, if you need mental health support or you're having a quite severe crisis, for example, we are really good in dealing with that actually now, and getting people the help they need and getting them back to work when it's appropriate to do so. But the goal is to stop people from getting to that point. So there's a number of different things that go on across the firm. We do quite a lot of things that go across the firm, but then within the individual teams, various things happen. There is regular wellbeing sessions in all of our teams around ways in which you can look after your physical and mental health, whether that's mindfulness, whether that is sleeping more. We're getting much more focused on how much sleep people need. And during the course of lockdown, we're doing a study across 1,000 of our employees on the link between numbers of hours you work, how much sleep you get, and the impact on your physical health. So we've got 1,000 people doing cognitive tests every day and wearing Garmin, one of these, because I'm doing it, to really try and understand the link between people's physical health and the impact that has on their ability to be at work. And it's all done in the way you would expect a research project to be done. So it's not like we're spying on people, in case anyone would be concerned about that. So that's going to really help us going forwards. We also have something called the Habit Bank. Now, actually, anybody can access the PwC Habit Bank. It's a website people can access. And in there's loads of different things that people can think about doing to help manage their well-being. And it spans a whole range of different things, because I think one of the things we're quite conscious of is that well-being is different for different people. And actually what we need to do is help people understand what works for them, and also understand that it's not necessarily static over time either. I know the things that I need to do now are very different to 10 years ago before I had children. So yeah, there's a fair amount going on.
Fantastic, thank you. I'm just going to take another 2 or 3 questions, then pass to David to close. And if we haven't answered your question, do email them to David, and we will ask the panel to come back to you on email. We've had loads of great questions here, so it's fantastic to see the engagement. So Andrew Holly, who's a HR partner at Sanofi, and also I noticed Judy, who I also work with at Biogen, where I used to be. I've kind of got similar questions here. Effectively around the fact that the impact of kind of COVID mental health being, how as leaders are we going to recognise this? How do we ensure people still come forward and discuss these issues? Are there any additional tools or resources that are potentially available? Perhaps Yvonne, if I could just ask you for your thoughts on that.
I've been part of the COVID steering group and managing the initial crisis within our organisation. So I guess I'm quite close to the leadership team in hearing, how we're going to manage that as an organisation. Certainly, we, like many other organisations, have reached out to our employee base via a survey to get some feedback around how people feel in the current climate, particularly around that return to work piece. And the new ways of working, and we've also taken to the leadership team, we will work across the business to get some insight into actually what are the behaviours that we've implemented during this time that actually would be beneficial to employee health to maintain post-COVID. And we've also worked very closely with our occupational health provider as well, and EAP provider, in terms of being able to proactively support those colleagues that may have concerns around situation, whether that be the physical return to work or those other impacts that the whole situation's had on us as individuals.
Excellent, thank you very much. I was going to say two quick final questions. The first one, I think this is a very, very good question, and I'll direct this to you, Gordon, actually, because I know we've been quite open about this in Sanofi. Just given the current climate and the fact that certain members of staff may be worried about the prospect of redundancy or being furloughed or ongoing anxieties because of the pandemic, what advice can you give to support staff and to ensure that they still can talk openly about their concerns?
And that's a really hard question with a minute to go. I think the kind of key is honestly openness to talk. What we've tried to do is really encourage a dialogue. We've had all employee webinars every week, every 10 days. Many departments have done some. I think it's really about talking and being open and letting people have these conversations. But that is a really hard one, because obviously some businesses are very affected. There's a lot of uncertainty around. So there will be lots of anxiety, but I think, you know, the key is honestly just to talk and be open. You know, it's okay not to be okay. And I think a lot of people are not feeling okay. And it's important. I think it helps if your senior leaders can acknowledge that people will be finding things difficult and should acknowledge that and not pretend it's not happening.
Excellent, thank you, Gordon. I'm just going to say one final question before we pass to David. I think I'll direct this to you, Claire. I think this is a very good question from Chris Stewart, effectively talking about the elephant in the room, that during lockdown, many people may actually be becoming more dependent on alcohol substance misuse to effectively self-medicate because of anxiety and stress. What can we do about that, and is the next challenge to achieve the same level of openness on those issues?
I think this has been a really big issue, and certainly I don't think there are any of us here who drink that haven't had some extra at some point during the lockdown. Interestingly, in South Africa, they banned the sales of alcohol because of the pressure that they felt the lockdown was going to put on services. And we have seen, as lockdown has reduced, we have seen some increased admissions into A&E from alcohol and substance misuse. I think it's an excellent point in terms of, so currently alcohol and substance misuse is separate, is commissioned separately from the NHS and creates it's by the local government public health, and that creates lots of problems. I think the coming together will support that. I think sorry, I've forgotten the name of the person who asked the questions, apology, makes a really, really good point in terms of doing those together. It is like the elephant in the room. There's varying degrees of evidence around what supports alcohol and substance misuse. So I can't answer exactly what we think this is, because it's a growing area of concern that we have. But certainly putting them together for me makes an awful lot of sense, because which came first, the alcohol substance misuse or the mental health problems? So they're interchangeable. So probably not the most thorough answer you'd want, but the one that I have right now. Is that okay?
So thank you very much, Claire. No, I think that issue of dual diagnosis is very, very important. But we must come to a stop. We've had so many questions. Please do email David and we will put them to the panel and come back to you with answers. Really would like to thank all the panelists for their contributions and for a very open, frank and clear discussion, which has been fantastic. I think on these key issues, we must ensure that we remain open, that a light never goes out, and we continue to work hard to use and share best practice. And I think this platform today has hopefully done that. So David, I'll just pass over to you to just wrap up and close.
Excellent. Thank you, Stuart. On behalf of the Chamber, thank you for attending today's webinar. I'm sure you'll join with me in thanking our panelists and our chair for sharing their expertise and insights. We recognise the limitations in a 1-hour webinar, to comprehensively cover today's multifaceted topics. I've got another 30 questions in front of me, both on chat and in the Q&A, and I would love to be physically at a round table with you guys, with a nice buffet lunch afterwards, where we could chat about these things. But just to let you know that this is just the start of a series of virtual and, when appropriate, face-to-face events, which we'll be hosting, where we can discuss and learn together more how to implement wellbeing strategies that raise awareness, reduce stigma, and truly support any who may be struggling, and compassionately support them in their road to recovery. Recognise that many of us will be joining from a perspective of, I need to set up a mental wellbeing strategy, where do I start? And recognise that we also have others who are well down the road, 3 or 4 or 5 years later, who can share their expertise. And what I love about this community is it's full of passionate people who are willing to learn, willing to discuss, and willing to get together. So please join us in this journey. I'll be circulating a copy of today's presentation, and maybe invite expressions of interest to those of you who may wish to join us as we go forwards. In closing, you'll agree we're currently facing unprecedented challenges, which is why the Thames Valley Chamber, alongside our partners in the British Chambers of Commerce, would like to draw your attention to a business continuity toolkit aimed at ensuring we have one single portal to access all of the COVID-related support. This is found at the website in front of you, Thames Valley Chamber, .co.uk COVID-19 business guidance, and we'll circulate later today. Once again, thank you for joining with us, and I hope this will be the first of many. This concludes today's webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much.